At the family lunch, my daughter-in-law said in front of everyone, "The only thing this woman wants is attention and inheritance." She didn't know about the change my husband had made to his will. "Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached." The Sunday afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of my son Michael's dining room, casting warm rectangles across the oak table where our family had gathered. I smoothed my hands over the navy dress I'd carefully chosen for the occasion, a family lunch that Michael and my daughter-in-law Claire had insisted on hosting. "More potatoes, Mom?" Michael asked, offering the serving dish. I smiled and nodded, though my appetite had been waning since Robert's passing 3 months ago. My husband of 32 years had left an emptiness in my life that felt impossible to fill. "So Barbara," Claire's voice cut through my thoughts, her tone carrying that familiar edge that always seemed reserved just for me. "Have you decided what you're doing with the house? It's awfully big for just one person." I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. Michael, my stepdaughter Emma and her husband, even my teenage grandchildren looked up from their phones. "I'm not making any hasty decisions," I replied evenly, the way I'd learned to do with Claire over the 11 years she'd been married to my son. It was our home for 30 years. Claire exchanged a meaningful look with Emma. My stepdaughter had always been skeptical of my relationship with her father, even though I'd raised her since she was 8. "Well," Claire continued, cutting her meat with deliberate precision, "Michael and I were thinking it might make sense to sell it soon. The market's good right now." "That's not really your decision to make," I said softly, feeling my chest tighten. Claire's perfectly groomed eyebrow arched. "We're just thinking practically. Robert wouldn't want you rattling around in that big house all alone. Plus, there are the medical bills to consider." "The medical bills are taken care of," I said. "Really?" Emma joined in, leaning forward. "Dad's treatments were expensive, Barbara. The insurance didn't cover everything." What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Robert and I had managed our finances carefully for years. The medical bills were substantial, but we had prepared. "I appreciate the concern," I said, reaching for my water glass to hide the tremor in my hand, "but I have everything under control." Claire's laugh was sharp and immediate. "Under control? Barbara, you haven't worked in 20 years. You have no idea what things cost now." Michael cleared his throat. "Claire, maybe we should." "No, Michael," Claire interrupted, setting down her fork with a clink that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. "Someone needs to say it. We're all thinking it." I felt my face grow hot as Claire turned to me, her eyes narrowed with a cruel confidence. "The only thing this woman wants is attention and inheritance." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. My grandson's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Emma glanced down, a small smile playing at her lips. Michael stared at his plate. Nobody defended me. Nobody spoke. In that moment, I thought of what none of them knew. How Robert had called me to his hospital room alone 2 weeks before he died. How he'd squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left as our attorney witnessed the changes to his will. "They don't see what I see in you, Barb," he had whispered. "They never have. But they'll understand soon enough." I set my napkin beside my plate and stood, careful to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for lunch. I think I should go now." "Mom," Michael finally spoke, rising halfway from his chair. "It's fine," I said, though nothing was fine. "I'm tired, that's all." Claire didn't even look up as I gathered my purse. "See? Always the victim." I felt my throat closing as I walked to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The humiliation burned through me, made worse by my son's silence. After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices, this was what they thought of me. They saw a widow hoping for a handout. They had no idea that Robert had left nearly everything to me: the house, his investments, his share of the business he and Michael had built together. In 1 week, at the official reading of the will, they would all know the truth. And I wondered, through my tears as I drove away, if any of them would ever look at me the same way again. That night, sleep eluded me. Claire's words kept echoing in my mind. The only thing this woman wants is attention and inheritance. I lay in the bed Robert and I had shared for 3 decades, staring at the ceiling fan's hypnotic rotation. If only they knew the truth. I reached over to Robert's empty side of the bed, my fingers brushing against the cool sheets. 3 months hadn't made his absence any easier. What would he have said if he'd been there today? Robert had always stood up for me, at least when he was well enough to recognize Claire's subtle jabs and Emma's cold distance. My mind drifted back to 1984, when I first met Robert at the community college where I was taking night classes. I was 22, working 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school. He was 34, a divorced father with an 8-year-old daughter and big dreams of starting his own construction company. On our 3rd date, Robert brought Emma along. She was all gangly limbs and suspicious eyes, watching me like I might disappear at any moment, just as her mother had. I remember kneeling down to her level, promising I wouldn't try to replace her mom, but hoping we could be friends. She had crossed her thin arms and looked away. She'll come around, Robert had assured me. But she never really did. When we married a year later, I used my savings, money I'd set aside for finishing my nursing degree, to help Robert start his business. "We'll pay it back into your education fund as soon as we turn a profit," he'd promised, his eyes bright with dreams. But there was always something more urgent, a new piece of equipment, an opportunity to bid on a bigger project, Emma's braces. I took on extra shifts at the diner, then a weekend job at the gas station. My nursing textbooks gathered dust as Robert's business slowly grew. By the time Michael was born in 1987, I'd set aside my own aspirations entirely. Our family needed me, and Robert's company was finally showing promise. Those early years were lean but full of hope. We lived in a tiny apartment, counting pennies, Robert working endless hours while I juggled the baby, Emma's increasing resentment, and part-time work. When Michael was 3, Robert landed his first major contract. 6 months later, we put a down payment on the house Claire now seemed so eager for me to sell. I got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Michael had played as a boy. The tire swing Robert had hung still swayed slightly in the night breeze. This home held every milestone, the pencil marks tracking Michael's height on the kitchen doorframe, the dent in the hallway wall from Emma's teenage door-slamming phase, the patio where Robert and I had spent countless evenings watching the sunset after his first cancer diagnosis. The doctors had given him 6 months. That was 15 years ago. I fought alongside him through the surgeries, the chemotherapy, the experimental treatments. When his medical insurance reached its limits, I sold my mother's jewelry and took a job managing the office at Robert's company to reduce overhead costs. No one, not even Michael, knew that I was working without a salary for nearly 2 years to keep the business afloat during Robert's first round of treatments. When Robert recovered against all odds, we agreed to keep these struggles private. "No need to burden the kids," he'd said. "What matters is we made it through." And we had made it through, time and again. The business grew beyond our wildest expectations. Robert's reputation for integrity and quality spread, and eventually, Michael joined the company after college. By then, Emma had moved away, started her own family with a husband who seemed to share her cool assessment of me as the woman who had replaced her mother, despite all evidence to the contrary. Claire entered our lives when Michael was 25, ambitious, polished, and immediately dismissive of his simple parents. From the beginning, she made it clear she thought Michael deserved better than the modest lifestyle we had chosen, despite our improving finances. Within a year of their marriage, she had convinced Michael they needed a bigger house, better cars, private schools for future children. The pressure on Michael to earn more, to demand a larger share of the business, created the first real tension between father and son. Robert's cancer returned just after their wedding. This time, he refused to let it disrupt the business. "Michael needs to establish himself," he insisted, even on days when the pain was etched into every line of his face. So we fought the battle quietly again. I drove him to treatments in the early mornings, before the office opened. I researched alternative therapies late into the night. I managed the household, the medical bills, and increasingly, the day-to-day operations of the company when Robert was too weak to go in. Claire never once offered to help. Instead, she began a subtle campaign, suggesting to Michael that perhaps his father was no longer capable of making sound business decisions. I overheard her once, whispering to him in the kitchen during a rare dinner at our home, "Your mother's controlling everything now. Who knows what she's convincing him to do with the company? With your company." When the cancer spread last year, Robert began putting his affairs in order. Without telling anyone, he asked our longtime attorney, James, to visit him in the hospital. Together, they revised his will. I was the only one present when he signed it, his hand trembling with the effort. "They think you're just along for the ride, Barb," he had said afterward, his voice thin but determined. "They don't see how you've been the foundation of everything. But they will." The alarm clock on my bedside table read 3:17 a.m. In 5 days, the family would gather in James's office for the official reading of the will. In 5 days, everything would change. Whether Michael would ever forgive me for something I hadn't even done, for simply being the beneficiary of Robert's clear-eyed assessment of our family dynamics, remained to be seen. I climbed back into bed, pulling Robert's pillow close. It no longer smelled like him. The waiting room of James Harrington's law office felt unnaturally quiet despite being filled with my family. Michael sat beside Claire, her red-painted nails tapping against her leather purse. Emma and her husband David had taken seats furthest from me, speaking in hushed whispers. Even my grandchildren were present, Michael's 2 teenagers and Emma's 10-year-old, all absorbed in their phones, unaware of the tension surrounding them. I had arrived early, finding comfort in James's kind greeting. He'd been Robert's friend and attorney for over 20 years. "Are you ready for this, Barbara?" he'd asked privately, concern evident in his eyes. I wasn't sure. Part of me dreaded the confrontation to come, while another part yearned for recognition of everything Robert and I had built together. The receptionist appeared at precisely 2 o'clock. "Mr. Harrington will see you all now." We filed into the conference room, family dynamics determining the seating arrangement. Claire positioned herself between Michael and me, a physical barrier she'd maintained for years. Emma took a seat directly across from me, her gaze cool and assessing. James entered with a leather portfolio. At 65, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had witnessed countless family dramas unfold in this very room. "Thank you all for coming," he began, opening the portfolio. "We're here to discuss the last will and testament of Robert William Harrison." James cleared his throat and began reading the standard legal preamble. I noticed Michael shifting in his seat, Claire's hand resting possessively on his arm. She caught my eye and offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now, regarding the distribution of assets," James continued, his tone deliberately neutral. "To my daughter, Emma Claire Harrison Thompson, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my grandfather's pocket watch collection, which she always admired." Emma's expression faltered slightly. She had expected more, that much was clear. "To my son, Michael Robert Harrison, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of first edition books." Michael sat up straighter, confusion evident on his face. Claire's fingernails dug visibly into her purse. "To my grandchildren," James continued, "I have established educational trusts of $25,000 each, accessible upon their enrollment in higher education." The teenagers briefly looked up from their phones, registering that something significant was happening. "And to my beloved wife, Barbara and Harrison," James paused, meeting my eyes with a gentle nod, "I leave the remainder of my estate, including our family home, my full ownership share of Harrison Construction, all financial accounts, investments, and personal property not otherwise specified." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the wall clock ticking, marking the seconds as the information sank in. Claire was the first to react. "That can't be right," she said, her voice tight with restraint. "I assure you, the will is legally sound," James replied. Robert was of sound mind when he signed this document, with 2 witnesses present. "But the business," Michael began, his face flushing. "Dad always said I would inherit his share." James nodded sympathetically. "There is a letter Robert asked me to read regarding the business." He extracted an envelope from the portfolio and read. Michael, I know this comes as a surprise. You've worked hard at Harrison Construction, and I've been proud to build it with you. But this company exists today because of Barbara. When I was sick, when we nearly lost everything, she saved us without ever seeking credit. She worked without salary for years. She made sacrifices none of you ever knew about. My share of the business is the smallest token of what I owe her. I trust you will work together, as she has always had a keen mind for the practical side of our operations, even if she remained in the background. Emma let out a disbelieving laugh. This is absurd. She manipulated him when he was dying. That's not true, I said quietly, the first words I'd spoken since entering the room. Then what is it? Claire demanded, abandoning any pretense of composure. How else would you end up with everything? Your father was not manipulated, James interjected firmly. Robert began making these changes well before his condition deteriorated. I can attest to his soundness of mind and his absolute certainty about these decisions. Michael stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need some air. He walked out without looking at any of us. Claire remained seated, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Is there anything else? She asked James, her voice brittle. There are some personal letters Robert left for each of you, James replied, indicating a stack of envelopes. And the will stipulates that Barbara is to serve as executor of the estate. Emma stood now too, gathering her purse. I think we've heard enough for today. As they filed out, Claire, Emma, and David, the confused grandchildren, no one spoke to me. Only James remained, watching me with compassionate eyes as the door closed behind my family. Are you all right, Barbara? I wasn't sure how to answer. The validation from Robert's words was overwhelming, but so was the pain of seeing my family's reaction. They looked at me like I was a stranger, worse, like I was an enemy. They'll come around, James said gently, though his tone lacked conviction. I gathered the personal letters with trembling hands, wondering if Robert's words to each of them might help bridge the chasm that had just opened beneath our feet. The weight of my husband's final gift felt suddenly crushing. He had given me security, recognition, control, but at what cost to the family we had built? I hope you're right, I whispered, but as I walked to my car alone, I feared that today had changed everything, and some bridges, once burned, might never be rebuilt. 3 days passed without a word from Michael or Emma. I moved through my empty house like a ghost, touching Robert's things, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake by not preparing them somehow. But how could I have explained? Would they have believed me? When the doorbell rang on the 4th day, I almost didn't answer it. Through the peephole, I saw Michael and Claire standing on my porch. Michael's expression was unreadable, but Claire's eyes darted around impatiently. I opened the door, instinctively smoothing my cardigan. Hello. Michael didn't return my greeting. We need to talk, he said, brushing past me into the living room. Claire followed, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. I closed the door, steeling myself. Would you like some coffee? This isn't a social call, Claire said, remaining standing while Michael lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa. I sat in Robert's recliner, drawing comfort from its familiar contours. What do you want to discuss? You know exactly why we're here, Claire said. Robert's will is a travesty. Michael built that company alongside his father for 15 years, and now you're just going to swoop in and take control? I've been part of that company longer than Michael has, I said quietly. Michael looked up sharply. What are you talking about? You answered phones part-time. Dad hired you out of pity when you complained about being bored at home. The dismissal stung like a physical blow. Is that what you think? That your father pitied me? What else would you call it? Claire interjected. You were a waitress when he met you. You never even finished college. Because I used my tuition money to help Robert start the business, I said, a lifetime of silence finally breaking. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat while your father built his dream, Michael. I paid our mortgage when the company almost went under during the recession of '91. I worked without salary for 2 years during his first cancer battle. Michael's expression shifted slightly. Dad never said. Of course he didn't, I continued, my voice stronger now. He protected everyone's feelings. He didn't want you or Emma to worry, so we kept our struggles private. But make no mistake, we were partners in everything. Convenient that you're only mentioning this now that he's gone, Claire said with a dismissive wave. You can say whatever you want without him here to contradict you. I stood up, feeling a flash of anger I hadn't allowed myself in decades. Wait here. I walked to Robert's study, my hands trembling slightly as I unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a weathered accordion file we had agreed to keep private. I returned to the living room and placed it on the coffee table. These are the records, I said, opening the file. Loan documents from 1985 with my signature as guarantor. Bank statements showing my personal accounts being emptied to cover payroll in 1992. The agreement I signed to work as office manager without compensation from 2008 to 2010. I spread the papers across the table. Your father kept meticulous records. He always said someday the truth would matter. Michael reached for the documents with hesitant hands, his expression shifting between disbelief and dawning comprehension. There's more, I said, pulling out a faded notebook. This was Robert's private journal. He started it when he was first diagnosed. Read page 37. Michael opened to the indicated page, Claire reluctantly leaning over his shoulder. Barbara remortgaged her mother's house today to pay for the experimental treatment, Michael read aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. She thinks I don't know, but James told me. She's selling her jewelry, working 16-hour days, all while making sure I don't worry. I don't deserve her. Claire's perfect composure finally cracked. This doesn't change anything. You're still taking what should rightfully be Michael's. I'm not taking anything, I replied, gathering strength from decades of silent endurance. I earned my place in this family and in that company through years of sacrifice neither of you has ever acknowledged. Robert saw that, even if you can't. So that's it? Michael asked, looking up from the papers. You're just going to take over? I never said that, I replied. I've been helping run that company for 30 years, Michael. Mostly from the shadows, yes, but I know every client, every supplier. I know which projects made us money and which ones nearly bankrupted us. I'm not planning to push you out. Then what do you want? He asked, and for the first time since Robert's death, I heard genuine confusion rather than hostility. Respect, I said simply. Recognition for the life I built with your father. A chance to be seen for who I actually am, not who Claire has decided I am. Claire flinched. I don't know what you're implying. Don't, I interrupted. For 11 years, you've belittled me at every opportunity. You've made Michael feel he had to choose between us. You've painted me as a simple, uneducated woman who just got lucky when Robert married her. I turned to my son. And you let her, Michael. You stood by while she twisted every interaction, every holiday, every family gathering into an opportunity to push me aside. Michael looked stricken. Mom, I never meant. I know you didn't, I said, some of the hardness leaving my voice. You were caught in the middle, trying to please everyone. But your silence hurt me more than Claire's words ever could. Claire stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We should be talking to our lawyer, not listening to this performance. Go ahead, I said, gathering the documents and returning them to the file. Contest the will if you want. These records will all come out in court. Is that really what you want? For everyone to know how you've treated me all these years? For the world to see what I contributed while asking for nothing in return? Michael put his hand on Claire's arm. Claire, wait. He turned to me, his expression conflicted. I need time to think about all this. I nodded, unexpected tears welling in my eyes. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. After a pause, I added, I never did. As they walked to the door, Michael turned back. Did you read Dad's letter to me? No, I said. Those were private. He said I should trust you, Michael admitted quietly. He said you were always smarter than both of us about what really mattered. After they left, I sat alone in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. For 32 years, I had been the backbone of this family, invisible but essential. Now I was finally being seen, for better or worse, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come next. 2 weeks passed in uneasy silence. I spent my days sorting through Robert's possessions, pausing often to hold a sweater to my face or run my fingers over his handwriting on old birthday cards. Each item carried memories, some sweet, some painful, all precious. The business continued without me. Michael hadn't invited me to the office, and I hadn't pushed. Some battles needed time. When my phone rang on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was surprised to see Emma's name on the screen. My stepdaughter had always been the more distant of Robert's children, keeping me at arm's length even during good times. "Hello, Emma," I answered cautiously. "Barbara." Her voice was stiff. I read Dad's letter. I sat down at the kitchen table, bracing myself. "I see. Did you know what he wrote to me?" "No," I said honestly. "Those letters were private." She was quiet for a moment. "He told me I'd been unfair to you. That I never gave you a chance." I closed my eyes, imagining Robert writing those words from his hospital bed, his thin fingers gripping the pen with determination. "He said you were the one who convinced him to pay for my art school," Emma continued, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That when he wanted me to get a practical degree, you argued that talent shouldn't be wasted." My throat tightened. "He was proud of you, Emma. He just worried." "But you didn't?" "I worried differently," I admitted. "I remembered what it was like to give up a dream. I didn't want that for you." Another pause, longer this time. "I need to think about this. I thought you should know I read it." After we hung up, I walked to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. The conversation wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Emma had reached out, something I wouldn't have thought possible 2 weeks ago. That evening, I made a decision that had been forming since the reading of the will. I called James and asked him to prepare the necessary paperwork. "Are you certain about this, Barbara?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I am," I replied. "It's the right thing to do." The next day, I drove to Harrison Construction for the first time since Robert's funeral. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked startled when I introduced myself. "Mrs. Harrison." "Of course, let me call Mr. Harrison right away." Moments later, Michael appeared in the lobby, his expression wary. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "We need to talk," I said simply. "Somewhere private." He led me to Robert's old office, which now showed signs of Michael's occupation, a different chair, new photos on the desk. Robert's presence had been neatly packed away. "I'm making some changes to the will," I began, settling into the visitor's chair. Michael's posture immediately stiffened. "What kind of changes?" "I'm transferring 50% of my shares in the business to you," I said. His eyes widened. "What? Why?" "Because it's the right thing to do. You've earned your place here, Michael. I never wanted to take that from you." He leaned back, studying me with confusion. "Then why didn't you say something before the will was read? Why let us all think?" "Because I needed you to know the truth first," I interrupted gently. "I needed you to understand what I contributed, what Robert and I built together. If I had told you before, you might never have believed me." Understanding dawned slowly on his face. "This was Dad's idea, wasn't it? The will, the letters, all of it." I nodded. "He knew how you all saw me. He wanted to correct that before he left." Michael rubbed his face, looking suddenly tired. "I've been angry at you for weeks." "I know," I said. "And hurt. I've been hurt for years, Michael. Every time Claire made a cutting remark and you stayed silent. Every time I was treated like an afterthought in my own family. A heavy silence fell between us. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words sounding unpracticed, genuine. "I never realized. I just thought that was how things were." "That's the problem," I replied. "That should never have been how things were." He nodded slowly. "So what now? You're giving me half the company, just like that?" "With conditions," I said. "I want a role here. Not daily operations, that's your domain. But I understand this business in ways you might not realize. I want to be on the board. I want my voice heard." Michael considered this. "That seems fair. But what about Claire? And Emma?" "I'm not doing this for Claire," I said firmly. "I'm doing it for you, for the company Robert loved, and for my own peace of mind. As for Emma..." I smiled slightly. "We're working on it." The tension in Michael's shoulders eased slightly. "She called me yesterday, you know. Said she was thinking about what Dad wrote." He hesitated. "Claire won't like this arrangement." "Claire doesn't have to like it," I replied. "But she does have to respect it, and me, if she wants to be part of this family moving forward." Michael looked down at his hands, then back at me with new eyes. "You're not what I thought you were, Mom." "No," I agreed. "I'm what your father always knew I was." As I left the office that day, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I hadn't given away my power, I'd claimed it. For perhaps the first time, my son was seeing me clearly, not as the background figure in his father's life, but as a woman of strength and dignity who deserved respect. That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, looking at the garden Robert and I had planted together over the years. The roses were blooming despite his absence. My phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Dinner Sunday?" "Just us. We have a lot to catch up on." I smiled and typed back, "I'd like that." It wasn't everything. Claire would still resist. Emma's olive branch was fragile at best. The road ahead would have bumps and detours. But for the first time since losing Robert, I felt like I hadn't lost everything. I had found my voice. 1 year later, I stood in my kitchen arranging cheese and crackers on a serving plate, pausing occasionally to glance out the window at the gathering in the backyard. The weather had cooperated beautifully for Robert's memorial, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that rustled through the old oak tree where we'd hung the grandchildren's swing set decades ago. "Need a hand?" Michael's voice came from behind me. I turned to find my son leaning against the doorframe, looking more like his father than ever in his blue button-down shirt. "Could you grab the lemonade from the refrigerator?" I asked, smiling as he moved comfortably through my kitchen, our kitchen. In the years since Robert's passing, Michael had become a regular visitor again, stopping by for coffee or bringing the kids for Sunday dinner. Together we carried the refreshments outside to where a small group had gathered, Emma and her family, a few close friends, and several employees from Harrison Construction. Notably absent was Claire, who had filed for divorce 3 months earlier, unable to accept the new family dynamic where I was no longer relegated to the background. The separation had been difficult for Michael, but also clarifying. I didn't realize how much she controlled things, he'd confessed to me over dinner one evening. How much she isolated me from you, from friends who didn't meet her standards. It's like I'd been living in a fog. As we set the food on the patio table, I caught sight of James chatting with Emma's husband, while my grandchildren played an elaborate game of tag across the lawn. Emma herself stood somewhat apart, admiring the rose garden. I made my way over to her. "Dad always loved these roses," she said as I approached, her eyes fixed on a particularly vibrant red bloom. "He did," I agreed. Though he pretended gardening was just a chore I roped him into. Emma smiled slightly. "He pretended a lot of things, didn't he? Like he was this tough businessman who never needed anyone." "Your father was complicated," I said. "Strong and vulnerable at the same time. He needed people desperately but hated admitting it." "Like me," Emma acknowledged quietly. Our relationship had thawed gradually over the past year. The letter from Robert had opened a door, but it was our own efforts that had turned it into an actual path. Halting conversations over coffee, shared memories of Robert, her tentative questions about my early life with her father. Small steps. "Barbara," she said now, turning to face me directly. "I've been meaning to tell you something. I'm considering moving back to town." I tried not to show my surprise. Emma had built her life 3 states away, always claiming she needed the distance from her hometown. "David's been offered a position at the university," she continued, "and I could easily transfer my art therapy practice. The kids would be closer to family." Family. The word hung between us, its meaning shifted and expanded from what it had been a year ago. "That would be wonderful," I said sincerely. "I'd love to have you closer." Emma nodded, hesitating before adding, "I thought maybe we could have dinner sometimes. The 4 of us, with David and Michael. Maybe, get to know each other properly." "I'd like that very much," I replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The gathering continued into early evening, people sharing stories about Robert, laughing more than crying, celebrating his life rather than mourning his absence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Michael clinked his glass to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "To my dad, who taught me about building, not just structures, but character." He paused, looking directly at me. "And to my mom, who showed me that true strength isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's in the quiet person who holds everything together when no one's looking." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the small crowd. Emma stepped forward, raising her glass. "To Barbara," she added, "who gave my father the greatest gift, being seen for who he truly was." I blinked back tears as glasses were raised in my direction. These were the moments Robert had wanted for me: recognition, respect, belonging. Not through inheritance or legal documents, but through genuine understanding. Later, as the last guests departed and Michael helped me clear the patio, he asked, "Have you thought more about the lakeside cottage?" The offer still stands. The cottage had been a dream of mine and Robert's, a quiet place by the water where we would retire. We'd looked at properties for years but never taken the leap. "Actually," I said, "I made an offer on the Miller property last week. It was accepted yesterday." Michael's eyebrows rose. "Mom. That's fantastic. Why didn't you say something earlier?" I smiled. "Today was about your father. I didn't want to distract from that." "Dad would have been thrilled," Michael said, gathering up empty plates. "You two talked about a lake house for as long as I can remember." "Yes," I agreed. "But I think he'd be even happier about this." I gestured to the yard we just shared with family and friends. All of us together, moving forward. After Michael left, I sat alone on the porch swing Robert had built when we first moved in. The night was peaceful, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. In my hand, I held the last letter Robert had written me, the one I'd found in his desk drawer after the funeral. "My dearest Barbara," it began. "If you're reading this, I've left you with quite a mess to clean up. I'm sorry for that. But I couldn't leave knowing they might never understand what you've meant to me, to all of us. You've always been the heart of this family, even when no one recognized it." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to my pocket. Robert had given me one final gift, not the money or the business shares, but the opportunity to be truly seen by my family. As I rocked gently on the swing, I felt Robert's presence alongside me, just as I had for 32 years. But now, for the first time, I also felt the presence of something new, a future shaped by my own hands, filled with relationships I was building on my own terms. Tomorrow, I would visit the lakeside property, my property now, and begin planning renovations. I had ideas for a dock where the grandchildren could fish, a sunroom where Emma and I might sit with our coffee on weekend mornings, a fire pit where Michael and I could continue our newly honest conversations under the stars. It wasn't the life I had imagined when Robert was alive, but it was a good life. A life where I was no longer defined by what others thought of me, but by what I knew to be true. I was Barbara Harrison, wife, mother, grandmother, businesswoman. Finally, completely, myself.